Welcome to How to Play Horus Heresy 3rd edition. In this video, we are going to cover the missions of Zone Mortalis. In the close and nightmare confines of a Zone Mortalis, warriors did not clash over nations, cities, or even battlefields, but in bloody and brutal room-to-room actions where every inch claimed, every hallway cleared, and every broken and slain defender was the truest measure of victory. Warriors would clash face to face in the gloom and gore of hab blocks, space stations, and ruined manufactoria, all in the hope of pushing the enemy back footstep by bloody, broken footstep. And it is only in the utter ruination of the foe in the dust and darkness that true control of a Zone Mortalis can be achieved. If you are looking for other videos on how to play the game, then you can find them all on the channel in a dedicated playlist. And if this video helps you, then please give it a like, consider sharing it with a fellow Heresy player, and let me know how you are enjoying the rules of the new edition. You could also consider joining the Hopeless Heresy Legion by subscribing and hitting the bell for more Horus Heresy goodness. Zone Mortalis is a special mode of play for Horus Heresy 3rd edition, allowing you to recreate tense, small-scale conflicts fought in the close confines of a city or a starship. A smaller-scale version of the normally sweeping battles of Horus Heresy, Zone Mortalis battles are more intimate and often equally as bloody affairs. In the previous videos, we covered the fundamentals and advanced rules of all Zone Mortalis engagements, and it is advisable for you to view those videos before viewing this one. In part 1, you will find the fundamentals and core concepts of the game mode, while in part 2 you can find the advanced rules. Having a good grounding in both will help you get the most out of this video. In this video, we will look at the missions presented in the Journal Tactica, the mission objectives, the deployment zones, and the setting up of a game. We will also look at some of the most effective units you can bring to bear in this most brutal of game modes, and how to get the most out of this most intense of game types. First of all, let's talk about some high-level differences between Zone Mortalis missions and the missions presented in the Horus Heresy core rulebook. As mentioned earlier in the series, Zone Mortalis is played at smaller points limits than standard Horus Heresy. A standard game is normally played at 1,500 points. Zone Mortalis is also played on a smaller battlefield, normally 3 foot by 4 foot, and the terrain is made up of a dense labyrinth of corridors and rooms. The mission objectives in Zone Mortalis also differ from the core missions. There are no objective markers used in Zone Mortalis, and instead the missions represent the bitter and brutal close quarters conflicts that break out in such close confines, and rewards you for taking highly skilled and brutal warriors into the conflict. Finally, Zone Mortalis games normally last 5 turns as opposed to the normal 4 turns of the core rulebook missions. They also feature a variable game length, meaning your mission may in fact last a 6th turn dependent on the mission. This means that ultimately, until the game is 100% finished, you cannot rest on your laurels. All these combine to make Zone Mortalis a fast, frenetic, and most importantly, fun game mode. All the details discussed in this and previous videos can be found in the Zone Mortalis Journal Tactica. It is advisable to have this to hand when playing your initial games. First of all, let's talk about setting up a mission. Step 1. Select mission. There are 6 standard missions available for Zone Mortalis, and you and your opponent can either agree between yourselves which one you want to play, or you can randomise by rolling a d6 and referring to page 23 of the Journal Tactica. The available missions are Sector Assault, No Quarter, Bloodied Ground, Seize Control, Nexus of Ruin, and Total Domination. Although the missions vary, all will feature some combination of the Zone Mortalis primary and secondary mission objectives, which we will discuss later in the video. Step 2. Select Army. Now you have your mission, the book then suggests you pick your army list for the game. However, I found that there is nothing stopping you making this your first step instead. In a standard game, your army should be 1,500 points, and you should follow all the rules set out for choosing armies in Horus Heresy. Remember, you also have access to the Zone Mortalis primary detachments as well to help you get started. We discussed this in detail in the previous video. Step 3. Prepare the battlefield. This step is probably one of the most fun and most involved steps in the process, setting up the lethal confines of the Zone Mortalis itself. Everyone has a different approach to setting up their battlefield for a game, and I would always advise going with whatever you and your opponent are comfortable with. The most important thing is that both you and your opponent are happy with the setup and agree with the layout prior to starting the game. However, the book does provide some suggested guidance. Bear in mind though, these aren't mandatory instructions, just some helpful guidelines to get you going. The board is normally 4 foot by 3 foot and divided into 12 by 12 squares known as sections. If you're using the official Zone Mortalis terrain, then this should be easy enough to spot, but if not, it would be worthwhile clearly marking the sections when setting up your table. Zone Mortalis terrain should be very dense and very narrow, with a few large areas for pitched battles. The claustrophobia is very much the point. The more terrain that blocks sightlines and impedes movement, the better. To help you get set up, the book suggests the following. The book suggests having at least 9 wall sections for a standard board. These should be between 2 inches and 12 inches long and 2 inches thick. However, go with whatever you have available and make it more or less dense as you see fit. The book suggests having a doorway for every section, so on a standard board this would be 12 doors. It suggests having a combination of large and small doors, and also having doors that clearly communicate whether they are open or closed. Again, your mileage may vary, and use whatever you have to hand and what you're comfortable with. You could also use this point to agree what form of the Doorway X special rule each door has. The book suggests having 24 pieces of scatter terrain representing barricades, and again, you can dial this up or tone this down as you see fit. Finally, the book suggests 2 pieces of light area terrain no bigger than a quarter of a section. Light area terrain does not block line of sight and gives a 6+ cover save to units within it. Normally, this represents things such as craters, broken pipes, or vehicle wreckage. Again, there is nothing to stop you using medium or heavy area terrain, or none at all. Once you have your play area and terrain, you and your opponent should take turns setting it up. I find this to be one of the most fun bits of the process, and setting up a board can be both fun and very involved as you both set up corridors, rooms and ambush points to tell a real brutal story. Having this kind of personal tie to the battlefield will 100% enrich your experience when playing. Step 4. Deploy objectives. Although currently no Zone Mortalis mission uses objective markers, the step is still in the process and would happen at this point. Step 5. Select deployment map. Although each of the missions comes with the same suggested deployment map, you can add another layer to the mission by randomly selecting a deployment map instead. Roll a d3 and compare it to the table on page 25 of the Journal Tactica. Either way, you will have one of 3 deployment maps: Primus, Secundus, or Tertius. Step 6. Declare reserves. Using a d6, roll off with your opponent. The loser will declare if they intend to put any of their units into reserves. Then, their opponent can decide if they will do the same. At least 1 unit from your army must be deployed on the table at the start of the game. However, all other units can be placed into reserves. When deploying in Zone Mortalis, you may quickly run out of room in your deployment zone, as the Zone Mortalis is such a small environment. If this is the case, then units that cannot be deployed must be put into reserves. These units will come onto the board after the game begins using reserve stratagems which we covered in the previous video. Step 7. Deploy armies. Using a d6, roll off once again. The winner will pick which of the 2 deployment zones they want and will deploy their whole army, including infiltrators. To deploy, place each of your units onto the table in unit coherency and within the borders of your deployment zone. For infiltrator units, place them anywhere on the table that is not within your opponent's deployment zone, and is at least a distance in inches away from your opponent's units equal to the X value. You must obey all the rules for Zone Mortalis terrain when deploying. So no placing units in impassable terrain, no placing units on top of walls, and make sure units are not in confined spaces they would not normally be able to fit within. When deploying, you may quickly run out of room in your deployment zone as the Zone Mortalis is such a small environment. If this is the case, then units that cannot be deployed must also be put into reserves. Once the first player has deployed their full army, then their opponent will do the same following all the same guidance. Step 8 and Step 9. Play the game and declare the winner. The player who deployed first gets the first turn. The game is played for 5 turns. At the end of turn 5, this player should roll a d6. On the roll of a 3+, the game continues for one final turn. Once all turns are played, both players tally up their victory points, and whoever has scored the most is declared the winner. Note that if at any point a player has no models on the table, then the game ends there, and victory points are tallied from that point. Importantly, models and reserves do not count as being on the table, so a game might potentially end with you still having living units off the table. Now we know how to get your missions set up, let's look at the core and secondary objectives of Zone Mortalis, which are fundamentally very different from the standard core rulebook missions. The primary mission of most Zone Mortalis engagements is simple: destroy the enemy. This is known as blood for blood. You score 1 victory point for every full enemy unit you can remove from the table, either through shooting, melee, or by routing them from the board. If the majority of the models in your unit have the Vanguard X special rule, then they would score the X value as victory points instead. This needs to be a kill, however, not a unit routing off the table. If you have mixed Vanguard X values, then use the highest value in the unit. Command subtype models count as their own unit and would also give you a victory point. However, you do not score this if they were killed in the challenge subphase. I have 3 units in the sewers of an underhive, and they spot some enemies ahead. One unit opens fire on the enemy, killing the unit completely. This scores me a victory point. My Terminators charge into the second enemy unit and kill them in close combat. My Terminators have Vanguard 3, so I would score 3 victory points here instead of the normal 1. Note that this is instead of, not in addition to. My final unit is another Vanguard unit accompanied by my Praetor, who charges the third enemy unit. My Praetor challenges the enemy commander who is leading them. They cross blades and my Praetor kills the enemy commander. Then, in the subsequent close combat, my unit wins and routs the enemy unit off the table. I would score 1 final victory point for routing the unit and removing them, but I don't get the Vanguard points, as you must kill the last enemy model to claim that. Furthermore, I would not get a victory point for killing the enemy commander, as this happened in the challenge subphase. There are 2 secondary objectives in Zone Mortalis: Slayer of Champions and Sector Domination. Slayer of Champions rewards you for killing enemies in challenges. If your model wins a challenge, and then its unit wins the subsequent combat in the following resolution subphase, then you score victory points. You also get an additional +1 victory point if the model you slew in the challenge has the Paragon subtype. My champion fights in the challenge subphase against an enemy command model and kills it after a very intense duel. The champion's unit kills several of the enemy commander's bodyguard and my side wins the combat. The enemy unit, despite everything, passes their leadership test in the resolution subphase and holds. However, as I won the challenge and I won the combat, I get an amount of victory points for Slayer of Champions. Meanwhile, my Centurion is also fighting in the challenge subphase and also kills his opponent. However, the enemy unit kills several of the Centurion's followers, enough to account for the combat resolution point of the challenge, and the combat ends in a draw. I would score no victory points for Slayer of Champions, as I would need to win the combat as well. The next secondary objective for Zone Mortalis, and one of the most intense, is Sector Domination. This represents your troops pushing into the Zone Mortalis and claiming ground from the enemy, holding it with their blood, sweat and blades. The goal of this objective is to dominate a sector. A sector is a predefined area of the map outlined in each of the missions. Note that although the term sounds similar to the 12-inch by 12-inch sections mentioned earlier, they are completely different. If you are the reactive player, then you can score victory points if you have more units in a sector than your enemy during their victory subphase. This means you score points for sector domination only in your opponent's turn. If you have 4 units in a sector and your opponent has 5, then they will score victory points in your victory subphase. If you kill 3 of these units and now have 4 and they only have 2, then you will score victory points in their victory subphase. If you have a unit with the Line X special rule, then they count as additional units when calculating this total. A tactical squad has Line 2, so when counting units for sector domination, the tactical squad would count as an additional 2 units, meaning they count as 3 units in total. A breacher squad has Line 1, When counting units for Sector Domination, the Breacher squad would count as an additional 1 unit, meaning they count as 2 units in total. In this way, line units still have a place in Zone Mortalis engagements. Note, the journal specifically mentions the line special rule, and not its equivalents. So at this moment in time, rules such as Comptroller or Desecrators would not benefit from this rule. On the flip side, a unit with any form of tactical status does not count towards your unit total. So if your unit is stunned, suppressed, pinned or routed, then you do not count them towards your total. If you have a unit that is partway between 2 sectors, then you decide which zone they will be in and count toward for that turn. However, a unit can only count as being in 1 zone per turn. So if you decide to have your unit counter the enemy's total in Sector A on your opponent's turn, then they could not also be counted toward the total for Sector B on your turn. You need to be mindful of where your units are each turn. My opponent and I are playing a Zone Mortalis mission with 4 sectors, and it is my opponent's victory subphase. At this point, I can potentially score 2 victory points for every sector I dominate. In Sector A, my opponent has a tactical squad and a support squad, as well as a dreadnought. Thanks to the tacticals line 2, they have 5 units in this sector. I only have a Breacher squad. Although they have line 1, it is not enough to outscore my opponent. I count as having only 2 units in that sector. I do not score Sector Domination for Zone A, as my opponent outnumbers me. Note that my opponent also does not score at this point either. They would score in my victory subphase. In Sector B, I have 2 Dreadnoughts and a Terminator squad led by my Praetor. I have 4 units. My Praetor counts as its own unit. My opponent has 1 tactical squad, so they would have 3 units thanks to their Line 2 special rule. I would score 2 victory points for Zone B. Note how close it was though thanks to the tactical squad's line ability. Sector C. My opponent has a Dreadnought and a Breacher squad. They have 3 units. I have a Melta support squad wholly in the zone, and a tactical squad partially in the zone. I would need to choose which sector the squad counts towards this turn. I choose Zone C, making my total for this sector 4. I would score another 2 victory points for Sector C. Finally, neither of us have any units in Zone D, except for my partial tactical squad and a squad of my despoilers who are stunned. I have already said the tacticals will count towards Sector C for this turn, and the despoilers have a status, meaning neither squad can dominate this sector. I would score no points for this sector. In my opponent's victory subphase, I would score 4 victory points thanks to dominating 2 sectors. Based on what I do and where I move my units in my next turn will define how much my opponent scores in my victory subphase. Sector Domination is great because it incentivizes you to take out your opponent's units and also try and save your own, and really rewards clever movement. And as it is capped at the value of X, a player that relies only on putting tactical squads in corners will eventually be outplayed and outscored by the player who pushes aggressively into the Zone Mortalis and scores kills. You'll also notice that the standard secondaries of First Strike, Last Man Standing, Giant Killer and Slay the Warlord are not in effect for Zone Mortalis missions. They may be introduced in the future, but in this Journal Tactica they are not used. These 3 objective types make Zone Mortalis a very close and very tight game mode that ultimately rewards you for moving forward and engaging with the enemy, which ultimately is what a war game is all about. It rewards clever play and strategies and makes you really consider how you deploy your units, what targets they initially go for, and really keeps the pressure on both players throughout the game. Before we look at the missions properly, we should mention some unique mission effects and modifiers the book highlights. We have already discussed Abyssal Darkness and Unknown Enemies in the first video, but there are a few other special mission effects that the missions may highlight for use. First of all, we have Breach Action. As your troops storm into the Zone Mortalis, they may deploy Melta Bombs and breaching charges to blow open hatchways and melt bulkheads to better facilitate their initial passage into the war zone. If the mission uses this special rule, then at the start of your first turn you may be able to remove some doors from your deployment zone. During both players' initial reserve subphase, before any reserve tests are made, roll a d3. The score represents the number of doors the player can change the state of in their own deployment zone. The state can only be changed from closed to open, and as your forces have effectively blown the doors up, the state cannot be changed to closed again. Next, we have Cogitator Terminal. On the battlefield of the Zone Mortalis, your forces may encounter advanced computer servers, data terminals and cogitator systems that they can attempt to hack into in order to effect changes and a deeper level of control of the battlefield. If the mission uses this special rule, then you should have some form of model or marker to represent the cogitators in question. Any model that ends its movement in base-to-base contact with the cogitator can attempt to hack into it using an interface test. This interface test should take place before the active player moves any other models, and importantly, it occurs before any movement-based reactions the reactive player may take. The interface test is performed against the model's intelligence stat. Although similar, an interface test is different from an intelligence test. Instead of rolling 2d6 and trying to score under your model's intelligence stat, instead you roll 2d6 and then subtract the result from your model's intelligence stat instead. So if I had a model with an intelligence of 9 and my score on 2d6 was 5, then my score would be 4, as 9 take away 5 equals 4. If I had intelligence 7 and my dice roll was a 9, then my score would be -2, as 7 take away 9 equals -2. It is possible to get a negative result on your interface test. Once you have your score, you compare this to the table on page 29 of the Journal Tactica to see what your interface test does. The higher your score, the more positive the effect, whereas the lower the score, the more negative the effect. This is a very involved and always hilarious special rule, which can dynamically change how both players interact with the Zone Mortalis. It does require a bit of admin on both players' parts as you record modifiers and battlefield effects, but I highly recommend giving this special rule a go at some point. So now we are equipped with all these special mission rules and objectives. Let's look at the 6 standard Zone Mortalis missions presented in the Journal Tactica. Mission 1 is Sector Assault. It is a running battle between two forces, with both sides seeking to claim as much territory as possible. Its primary mission is Blood for Blood. Players will also score 2 victory points for every sector they can dominate in their opponent's turn, and will score 3 victory points for every enemy commander they can kill in a challenge and then win the following combat. The battlefield itself is split into 4 equal sectors for sector domination. The mission uses the special rules Breach Action, Seize the Initiative and Reserves. Finally, its deployment is set to Primus deployment, with equal deployment across the long board edges, although this can be changed by you and your opponent. This is the standard Zone Mortalis game, and an excellent starting point for your first few games. It focuses on killing enemies and scoring gradually with sector domination. As each sector is large and balanced, both players can get on the scoreboard fairly quickly. Mission 2 is No Quarter. This is a rushing battle that encourages both sides to move deeper into enemy territory and rewards very aggressive play. Again, its primary mission is Blood for Blood. Players will score 2 victory points for every sector they can dominate in their opponent's turn, and will score 3 victory points for every enemy commander they can kill in a challenge and then win the subsequent combat. The mission uses the special rules Breach Action, Seize the Initiative and Reserves. The battlefield is split into 3 long, equal sectors for sector domination, each one being 12 inches wide and 48 inches long. Again, it uses the Primus deployment along the long board edges. This mission gives each player a single sector off the bat for sector domination, and demands the players meet in the middle in order to gain the upper hand. This mission rewards mobile and aggressive play and is guaranteed to be a bloodbath in the middle of the map. Mission 3 is Bloodied Ground. This battle is based on momentum and relentless pressure, and only the most aggressive and brutal army will succeed. Again, its primary mission is Blood for Blood. Players will now score 3 victory points for every sector they can dominate in their opponent's turn. However, these victory points will start to lower as the game progresses. From turn 2, the special rule Momentum kicks in. The amount that sector domination awards is lowered by 1 for every unit that has models in the player's own deployment zone. Essentially, if I have 1 unit in my deployment zone in turn 2, sector domination will only be worth 2 victory points. If I had 2 units, then it would only be worth 1. It is even possible for sector domination to be worth no points at all. However, If your models move out of your deployment zone, then sector domination returns to normal in subsequent turns. Essentially, you want to get your units out of your deployment zone as quickly as possible in this mission. Again, the battlefield is split into 3 long equal sectors for sector domination, being 12 inches tall and 48 inches long. Finally, you also score 3 victory points for every enemy commander you can kill in a challenge and then win the following combat. The mission uses the special rules Breach Action, Seize the Initiative and Reserves. This mission is the bane of the defensive player and rewards moving forward and claiming ground. By essentially forcing your units out of their own deployment zone, this mission ensures that there will be a battle at the heart of the zone. Inversely, being able to contain your opponent to their deployment zone is also a very valid strategy, and aggressive play is a must in this mission. Mission 4 is Seize Control. This is a more strategic mission, with both sides attempting to minimise casualties while capturing key infrastructure in the zone. The side with control of the systems of the zone will be the ultimate victor. Again, its primary mission is Blood for Blood. Players will score 2 victory points for every sector they can dominate in their opponent's turn, but will only score 1 victory point for enemy commanders they can kill in a challenge. The mission uses the special rules Seize the Initiative and Reserves. The battlefield is split into 4 equal sectors, each 12 inches wide and 36 inches tall. It uses the Primus deployment map. This is also the first mission to feature Cogitator terminals. Both players get 1 Cogitator terminal token each. They can place these anywhere on the battlefield outside of both deployment zones. These Cogitators will use the Cogitator terminal special rule described earlier in the video. Although similar in structure to the other missions, the addition of 2 Cogitator terminals means the possibility for utter chaos breaking out within the zone is very, very high. Having high intelligence models is a must, and whoever can get their interface tests done successfully will have a much easier time than their opponent. Mission 5 is Nexus of Ruin, and this mission is a bit more involved in both setup and implementation, and I wouldn't advise doing it as your first game of Zone Mortalis. This mission features forces using large freight elevators to enter the battlefield, and both sides are fighting over an incredibly small sector at the heart of the battlefield. This mission uses Blood for Blood and also Slayer of Champions, which is worth 3 victory points. It also uses Seize the Initiative. The map is split into 3 sectors. In the centre of the map is 2 of the sectors, Alpha and Beta. Each sector is 10 inches tall and 24 inches wide. This area should be totally open with no walls, but can feature both area terrain and barricades. The rest of the map is another separate sector. If you have more units in either Sector Alpha or Sector Beta, then all your sectors are worth 5 victory points. If you have the most units in only the outside sector though, then you only score 3 victory points per sector. Having the most units in all 3 zones in your opponent's victory subphase would score you 15 victory points. This mission uses reserves. However, the only reserve stratagem that can be implemented is the Mass Elevator Reserve stratagem. 2 cargo elevators are set up on the board on either side of the central sector. When testing for reserves, the test required is 3+ on 1d6. If successful, the unit can stay in reserves or immediately be deployed from any point designated as a mass elevator. Essentially, for reserves, use the mass elevator as your board edge. The elevators should either be open on all sides or, if enclosed, at least one side should be left open. Otherwise, this mission uses the Primus deployment map. This mission is chaos, pure and simple. Placing the highest scoring potential in the centre of an open area of the map is one thing, but by having 2 mass elevators on either side of it means that whatever battles take place within are going to be pitched with the potential to get out of control very, very quickly. This is a fantastic opportunity as well to kitbash some elevator platforms, and you can really go to town complementing your Zone Mortalis board. The final mission in the book is Total Domination, and this mission is the simplest and most bloody of all. The entire map is 1 sector, and sector domination is worth 10 points. However, it can only be scored in the final turn of the game. Blood for Blood is not active in this mission, and Slayer of Champions is only worth 2 victory points. To win this mission, you must destroy the enemy and keep your own forces alive. That's all there is. This mission is frantic, brutal, and bloody, and can only be won by those who can wipe out the enemy effectively. It is no place for the meek or the timid. These 6 missions, while all being variations on a similar theme, are all varied and exciting to play. I would advise giving the first mission a go first with no changes to get a feel for the game, and then open the floodgates to the randomness that is the other missions. Each one also uses the Primus deployment map as standard, but there's nothing to stop you and your opponent agreeing to a different deployment map at the start of the game. Now we know the zone with better detail, including the objectives our forces will be fighting and dying over. Let's have a look at a few of the units I think you will find particularly rewarding in your Zone Mortalis engagements. The book introduces some new units for 3 of the armies which are excellent fits for Zone Mortalis. For Astartes armies, the new Veteran Despoiler and Veteran Breacher squads are natural stars and excellent fits for room-to-room combat, while the Solar Auxilia get the Velataris Raider section, an elite squad armed with shields and shotguns and a chunky Vanguard 3. My favourite though is the Castellax Infernus Manipole, a Mechanicum Heavy Automata armed with the Purge Incinerator that is Strength 6, Breaching 6+, and Panic 1. These things are going to do some serious damage. As Vanguard scores victory points in Zone Mortalis, the majority of Vanguard units suddenly become a lot more attractive. Tartaros Siege Terminators will do incredibly well, as will any Weapon Skill 5 Terminator squad. Velataris sections will also shine, particularly squads armed with heavy flamers who will naturally panic what they do not kill. Custodes will naturally be very powerful with the Blood for Blood special rule and are ones to be feared. Squads that can level status causing fire will also do well, so something like the Ultramarines Full Mintaris Terminators with Splinter missiles will really lift their weight. The Mechanicum's Volturax squadrons are very good at this also, and having one of these hideous machines creeping towards you in a Zone Mortalis is always going to be a problem. Infiltrator units are also incredibly powerful in Zone Mortalis, being able to snatch sector domination early and set up sneaky ambushes. Seeker squads are naturally excellent for this, as are recon squads armed with shotguns. High intelligence units and units with Battlesmith are also very valuable for opening doors and using Cogitators, so all Mechanicum commanders, Tech Marines and the new Solar Auxilia Combat Technicians section will really benefit your forces. Finally, Dreadnoughts, Sentinels, Armigers and all other walkers are natural stars, being way more survivable in the cramped confines of a Zone Mortalis. However, just watch out for the bulky X special rule in relation to doors and confined spaces. They cannot do well if they cannot get into the fight. However, as with everything in Horus Heresy, you will naturally discover what you like and what works well, and most importantly what you and your opponent have the most fun playing with. Zone Mortalis is one of the most exciting additions to Horus Heresy 3rd edition, and the new rules and missions it brings are very welcome and adds to the rich tapestry the game paints. I love this game mode, and I strongly suspect that you will too. And that is the end of my How to Play Zone Mortalis series. Thank you very much for watching, and best of luck as you delve into the nightmare depths of the Zone Mortalis.